you're getting taxed on things that that do not need to be taxed because this merchant record service, in this case, we're kind of picking on Markets Pro because it's the most visible, right? You can read about this on the website, and not that we're picking on it. It's just understanding the differences because there are some pros to it. But they are the merchant of record. They have to remit tax into Australia, into Norway, into the UK. They have to do the IOS. If it's outside the US, coming into the US, all 50 states are going to be taxed.
All right, Clint, let's get this thing kicked off. But I want to tell you a little bit about myself. Did you know that I am amazing at managing my credit card?
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. My bank keeps sending me letters saying my account is outstanding.
You are outstanding, Aaron. Mm-hmm. That's an outstanding way to kick this off. The Decoding Cross-Border E-commerce podcast by Zonos. We're your hosts, Clint Reed, Aaron Bezant, and we've been talking about this subject for a while. We wanted to hit on, which is because it does apply to international e-commerce, especially. So I think this episode is going to be really good for e-commerce companies, but also anyone in the supply chain industry trying to understand what e-commerce companies go through and what's a merchant of record and how does it, why is that a thing in this space? So I think talking about merchant of record today, but we're going to flip the tables here. I'm usually the one trying to ask the questions. I think today you're going to be the one asking me a few more questions on the subject, but you can chime in. I know you know a lot about the subject too, but it's something we've been dealing with for a long time.
No, absolutely. I'm by no means the expert when it comes to payment processing, merchant of record stuff. That's where I think you come into this. So I'd love to be here to ask a few questions, but I think this is something I hear a lot, and I've heard for years, this merchant of record term, and it's used in a lot of different ways to help sell products and things. And I think there's definitely some value to it, but maybe sometimes it's a little oversold too. That's just kind of my impression.
You mean in this space, right?
It's
oversold as a service of itself, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. I think it depends. I mean, sometimes and sometimes not. Yeah.
Yeah. And from what I understand, I think we've got some experience with this as we go back for the whole life of Zonos as a company, and so I'm super excited to talk through this with you, and for myself to be able to get a better understanding of this. But let's just kick it off with the simple question: what the heck is it? What's a merchant of record?
Okay, so the merchant of record. Think of it this way: you're outstanding. You're so outstanding when you log into your bank account, you see all those transactions, and then there's a name, right? A company name on that transaction. That's the legal entity that is responsible for the transaction. That is the merchant of record that's on the credit card statement. So have you noticed ever when you buy something somewhere and then you kind of get we bought our drinks from Swig, but maybe it's Swig Inc. that shows up on the credit card transaction. It's the actual legal entity that shows up on there.
Okay.
So when you're the legal entity, you assume a lot of responsibilities, right? You assume responsibilities for the chargeback, if there is one, right? If there's a dispute, you assume responsibility for the tax liability on that. So you assume a lot of liability when you're the merchant of record, but that's really what it is. It's that simple. They're the ones that are taking on most of the legal responsibility for the transaction.
Okay. So how does this apply to cross-border?
Let's do a history lesson. First off, as we talk about the subject today, you and I, Aaron, I would say we are very good generalists, maybe at understanding subjects. We know a lot about a lot, and
you mean a little about a lot.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, a little about a lot, enough to be dangerous about a lot of different things, right? So, but we are usually never, except maybe in the duty and tax calculations realm, that is our thing. We have to understand such a large breadth of different subjects. So the caveat today is there are other people that understand the details about this. I think what we understand really well is the application of merchant of record. Okay. So E4X, have you ever heard of these guys?
This goes back a while.
Oh, wow. You do remember. You do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So E4X was a company that started offering a service that would take the payment in the local currency, and this is how this ends up in our industry, right? So they're like, look, we can actually present. Present means show the currency to the shopper in the amount that they're actually going to pay. So it's like a local transaction, right? This is what presentment is. So you present to the shopper that it's going to be 50 CAD and their credit card shows 50 CAD, just like if they went and spent 50 Canadian dollar just down the street at the store. So E4X said, look, we're going to do this for cross-border where when someone is shopping on a website, we can show the 50 Canadian dollars and then the person doesn't get hit with like foreign exchange fees, right, on the credit card transaction and all of that. And
can we?
Yeah.
So if you don't do that, let's talk a little bit about.
Okay. Yeah.
If I'm Canadian and I buy from a U.S. site and I get charged in U.S. dollars, what's my experience?
Well, you might as well just flown over to the U.S. and you swipe your credit card somewhere. So you're going to get the experience is that transaction is going to occur in U.S. dollars, and now the banks are going to be the ones that are determining. The banks determine what the FX rate is that's going between, and then typically, so you get hit with a foreign exchange. So it. This is actually a really important subject. I'm glad you asked this question. You get hit with additional costs that you don't even understand because the FX is a higher rate. It's like a commercial rate versus a mid-market rate, right? Mid-market being Google. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get the Google rate. So that happens. And then usually your credit card company will charge you a fee, right? A foreign transaction fee is what they call it. So you might get hit with another 1.5%, 2%, 3% fee. And a lot of times this can end up being around 5%. So it's actually very expensive for the credit card holder, the one that's paying the transaction. And then the merchant, for them, that didn't matter. They just got paid in US. It was just USD. Okay.
So they're making, so the credit card companies and financial institutions involved are making some cream on that.
Yep.
And me as the shopper, I don't even really know what the total cost is going to be until I actually see it on my credit card statement.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
You have no idea. You have no idea. I mean, you might know what your fees are with your credit card company, but what you don't know is, was it Visa? Was it MasterCard? Was it American Express? PayPal is like the worst offender. So the PayPal costs are much higher. It's extremely expensive. But yeah, that's I think that's your question.
Yeah. Yeah. So we go back to E4X.
Right.
They came up with a way for me as a Canadian shopper, 50 CAD.
Yep.
I see 50 CAD. I'm happy. I get exactly what I expected.
Yes.
And the experience is
so they look, they might do the same markup. I don't know, right? So they might actually give the same markup in the end, but at least you knew what it was going to be. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they're saving you a little bit of money. Just probably depends. I mean, if it was PayPal, maybe. And then they make a cut because they cut out the banks, right? So now the banks aren't making the money, right, on the transaction and that movement. So it's almost like an arbitrage, right? They're like, okay, you make money here. We're going to arbitrage this and make money this way, E4X. And what they realized is that as you're doing, I'm putting myself in their brains is how this transformed into our industry of duties and taxes, because this is where we're going, right? It's like, how did this get into duty and tax? They realized that the companies that they were helping are like, hey, that's all great and all. The payment is wonderful, but I'm having to deal with the duties. I'm having to deal with the taxes. I'm having to deal with shipping. Like I have all these other problems. So even if you can do this for me at checkout, I still have so many other things to solve. And then was born Borderfree. And
51 before Borderfree.
Oh, correct. Sorry, man, you did do your history.
Well,
so 51 first, right?
Yep.
Yes, correct. That is correct.
I looked at this back when I was at an e-commerce retailer and I was building out our international program. They were 51 at the time when I was looking at them.
Yeah.
So
51 and 51, I think acquired Borderfree, which is a Canadian company at the time, right?
Yep.
And did logistics. And so 51 kind of, once this was combined into the Borderfree entity, they started to offer this all-inclusive service where, look, we're going to be the merchant of record. We're going to take on the fraud risk. And there were other providers at the time, but Borderfree was the one that took off with this type of service. And it was a merchant of record service. And International Checkout did the same thing. And there was a bunch of others at the time. In fact, when I started the company, this was in 2009, we were the merchant of record. We offered a similar service. We were offering some shipping with it. This was a very short-lived period. And so in fact, some of those customers are still around today. Like you can't shake them. It can be in some ways a very good service. It's a costly service, and we can go into some reasons why it can get expensive. But it's a very pain-free experience.
So why would someone seek out? I'm trying to understand the difference here. Before we dive into just kind of some of the pros and cons. can't I just use a payment processor to run my transactions? Like, what? Help me understand the difference between merchant of record versus just using a payment processor.
Yeah, so we should put in the show notes. I think Stripe has a really good document on the difference between a payment facilitator, a PayFac, and a merchant of record. And Stripe is, in most cases, 99.9% of the time, they are a payment facilitator where you get to be the merchant of record. I'm sorry, yeah, right. You as the seller get to be the merchant of record.
I'm using them as for their tools and
they're the ones that are still connecting all the banks. But in the end, if there's a chargeback, that's on you. If the account gets shut down, only your account gets shut down, not entire, because as a merchant of record, there's a lot of risk in there where you can, and sometimes you're overly cautious, right? Because you don't want to take on certain goods that can shut down the clothing store because you took on a store that does vaping.
Okay.
So there's, right? Because you're now the aggregator of everything.
Got it. So payment processor, I'm using their tools, their technology. They're making it easy for me but I'm still the one running my business utilizing their technology. But it sounds like merchant of record's a little different than that, a little more involved than that.
Right. You might still be using a payment facilitator. You are in most cases. And then the merchant of record is, again, it's that legal entity that gets stamped on the transaction.
Okay.
Where everything flows back to them on the legality side, right?
Okay. So why would you pick one over the other?
Well, first off, this is not a thing domestically, really, right? Like with outside of, unless you're working with a marketplace. So, our family, we have a family business that does e-commerce, and we sell on Shopify. We also sell on Amazon, Walmart Marketplace, eBay. Those three platforms are, they are the merchant of record because they are the seller. What's on the transaction when you buy from Amazon is Amazon. Yep. It doesn't show.
I've seen a lot of those on my credit card statements. A lot.
Yeah. Well, and we couldn't get a dad joke around that. So anyway, but my Shopify account is my family business shows up on that transaction. So it's, if there's a chargeback on Shopify or something else, that comes back to me. Whereas Amazon, if it's fraudulent or whatever, like Amazon's worrying about that. This is why it became a thing internationally. What happens a lot, Aaron, internationally that happens more than domestically?
Oh, I can think of a few things, but we're talking fraud.
Fraud,
right?
Big one of those.
Is that the big one you're thinking of?
Yep. Fraud is the one thing that happens at such a higher rate internationally. So I think that was one of the big pitches is, look, we'll be merchant of record. We now have liability for the fraud. And beyond that, I feel like the rest of the things that are kind of pitched, like we'll take title of the goods, we'll do your tax, we'll take care of the tax. You don't have to worry about that. Like those are all services that don't, that can be done probably without having a full merchant of record service. But yeah, that's what happened is it became a thing because we can now do the present in your local currency, meaning we're going to show it in Canadian dollar. We're going to settle, which is different than presentment. Presentment is what you show the shopper. Settle is what goes into the bank account of the seller. And we'll settle into your local currency. So you just get the money in what you would expect in US dollars. And some merchant record services will guarantee that what you get paid out in USD and others don't. You just get whatever exchange rate, like the Markets Pro solution. You'll just, whatever exchange rate's happening at the time, you might win or gain a few pennies, but it's not going to reconcile to a US dollar, a US order.
So you're saying on, as a seller, if I'm selling, you use Shopify Markets Pro as an example. If I sell something that's 50 USD and gets marked up, am I going to still get my 50 USD?
No. You'll get close to that though. They try to get as close as they can, but you're not going to get exactly 50 USD.
I'm going to get 50-ish.
50-ish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas if I sell domestically, I'm getting 50 every time.
You're getting 50. Or if you're using like Zonos checkout, because we outside of Shopify, and we can talk about this in a second, you're getting 50.
Okay.
We'll do the 50. But it just depends on the service, and it's just good to understand what they're doing there and who's taking on that exchange rate risk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So merchant of record.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. Back to your question, which is how did this become a thing? Okay. They wanted to be, okay, how do I settle? How do I present in the local currency, settle in the seller's currency? How do I take on the fraud risk? How do I take title of the goods so I can then do the tax? Like all of this, that's how this solution was born is we're going to take all these pains that you have and just bucket it under this. What was different though, too, is they added to that shipping, right? Mm-hmm. So not only were they the merchant of record, they were also the
exporter
of record, which are two different things.
Okay.
So explain what the export of record is. And I mean, we talked about what a merchant of record is. So now what's an export of record? Because a lot of times these two things get confused.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Well, export of record, the country that you're in, depending on the type of product you're selling, you're going to have some restrictions around what you can ship out of the country. And so whoever's the exporter of record, the one that's shipping them out, needs to comply with those laws. In e-commerce, it's not that impactful. It's really not. No. But that's who's shipping the goods. Like who's the entity that's making those goods move out of the country that they're in? That's the exporter of record.
Yeah, it's that simple, right?
But that's not connected to how the payments were processed.
No. But a lot of times they get conflated, right? Mm-hmm. The two. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Not connected.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay. So let me boil this down, and then we can dive into it a little deeper. Payment processing. We're talking moves the money. Sounds like nowadays you can do the whole presentment of local currency, settling, all of that stuff. All that can still be facilitated nowadays.
Yeah,
and with a payment processor.
Yeah,
so that
I think we'll talk about more of that in detail in a second.
Merchant of record is actually where you're using a third party to actually take on all of that responsibility.
Yep.
In a transaction, which means what kind of liability and responsibility is a merchant of record taking off of your hands?
Well, first, they are actually not taking all of the merchant record responsibilities. Meaning, technically, yes, technically they are, but in practicality they are not. So technically what they are the merchant of record, and they are responsible for all the chargebacks and all of those things, correct, no matter what type of chargeback. In practicality, what they do is they give you an agreement that says, look, well, let's peel off the things that we actually are going to throw back at you, right? So, and a lot of them make sense, if the wrong item was in the box, right? Like friendly chargebacks, things like they will push back to the, I think that, there's a few examples that Shopify had on their website of things that they, let's see, I'm probably not gonna be able to find it very quickly here, but, okay. This is what they say about fraud and chargebacks. It's checked for fraud and even given chargeback protection. However, the following cases, you're responsible to handle the chargeback yourself. Friendly fraud, known as chargeback fraud, usually occurs when a customer makes a purchase with their credit card, receives a product, and disputes it with the credit card company, claiming it was fraudulent. Like, this is one of the biggest ones.
Yep.
So this is something that Zonos covers with our checkout, friendly fraud. But if it's a dispute for fraud, we're dealing with it, period. But in this case, we're going to peel this one off and say, no, it's on you. Like a service area fulfillment issue, those ones make sense, right? Wrong. You shipped a blue shirt and it was supposed to be green, and there's a chargeback. Dangerous goods that are shipped by mistake or things like that. Those are some of the things that are not covered, which make total sense. That should not be. So what they're doing though is in order to get to the path of like, what are we trying to get to at the end here, Aaron? You're just trying to say, take the few pains I don't like about international and make them really easy. And then a company says, look, I'll do a merchant of record service, but now I have to actually write into our agreement a lot of things that I can't take responsibility for to kind of find that middle ground. Mm-hmm. So it's not a full-blown true merchant of record service, but yeah. I mean, it's that's how they achieve the goal of making it simpler.
So what's some of the advantages? Because I'm sure there's a good, valid use for merchant of record service in e-commerce. What's kind of typical use case or areas where there's a benefit to it?
Well, I mean, I think we talked about, we already went over what it does, right? It is great to present in the local currency. It is good to get a settlement back in US dollars. It is nice when you don't have to get a bank account set up in another country, like those kind of things. But again, I think the better question is what things can you not achieve with, why do you need it, right? In order to, I think that's a better question. Yeah. This is where the differences come in, because in order to send the advantages, you have to understand the differences between using a merchant of record service and not being a merchant of record service. So look, we talked about the advantages, right? So maybe dive in a little bit into some of the disadvantages. First off, because it's a merchant of record service and they're settling to a bank account in that country, meaning, okay, I know 2 settlements are occurring. There's a settlement back to the merchant, which is happening in US dollar, right? So with, we'll kind of use the Shopify merchant of record service example because Globally does that one. The money, they'll get paid out in US dollars, but the actual settlement went into a bank account in France or something like that, if it was an order to France. So, well, the payout speed is extremely long, right? So with Stripe, like Stripe is our PayFac. They're our payment facilitator for Zonos checkout. And the payout after it settles, right? The transaction is complete, will happen next day, right? In US dollars in the expected amount. In this case with Markets Pro, I believe that it takes, okay, so on their website it says it's collected, they're combined, they do a combined payout on the 1st, the 8th, the 15th, and the 22nd day of the month. So that basically once a week, you're going to get a payout. And it's going to be up to 3 days after the transaction settles when you get the payout. And it has to be shipped, right? So with Amazon's similar, right? With a merchant of record service, you have to record that it has been shipped in order to settle and complete the transaction, which is a good practice anyways, but not everybody does it. So let's say you had an order on like the 13th or the 12th on like a Thursday, and you don't ship it out till Monday, which is past the 15th. So your order on the 12th now is going to get out to the 22nd. And then it might take 3 days to get the payout from the 22nd, right? Because once the payout gets initiated, it's going to take a few days. Something like that. But regardless, right, you could end up having well over a week of time from the time it happens till the time you get paid. Whereas if you were just using a normal a payment facilitator, you're getting paid next day. So that's one example.
Which that can be pretty impactful for an e-commerce business. We're talking cash flow here. This is massive.
If international weekly sales are on average a week, let's say you're doing $5,000, $10,000 a week in sales, that cash is gone
right
out of the gate. So that is one of the disadvantages is you really do have less cash when you're using a service like this. There's just no way around it for the most part because the payout speed is just not quick enough. There's another major disadvantage for small to medium sized businesses. And if you go back to our podcast when we talked about low value tax schemes, one of the things we learned with low value tax schemes is does not apply to every single merchant. It depends on your thresholds, how much you're selling into a certain country or into a certain state, right? Australia, it's 70,000 AUD. And then you have, into the US, every single state, you have different taxes depending on the state. Like, okay, let me give you this example. This actually kind of applies domestically too. I'll give you my example with our e-commerce store. We don't do a lot of sales on our Shopify store. We do a lot on Amazon and some other market channels. So on my Shopify store, I pay tax into Utah because I have Nexus in Utah and, a couple other states where there's a reason for me, I have Nexus, I need to pay tax. Amazon, every single order is taxed. So this same principle is occurring cross-border, meaning that, and this is a huge deal, into Australia, anything under 1,000 AUD, you do not have to pay GST unless you meet their annual threshold of 70,000 AUD. For a lot of small businesses, they are not meeting that threshold. No. So, so what does that mean then? You're getting taxed on things that do not need to be taxed because this merchant record service, in this case, we're kind of picking on Markets Pro because it's the most visible, right? You can read about this on the website. And not that we're picking on it, it's just understanding the differences because there are some pros to it. But they are the merchant of record. They have to remit tax into Australia, into Norway, into the UK. They have to do the IOS. If it's outside the US, coming into the US, all 50 states are going to be taxed. I mean, imagine if you're a retailer in Australia and you sign up for a merchant of record service. What's your biggest market? US.
Right.
And the chances of you, because you're also an Australian entity, the chances of the US being as impactful Nexus wise as a US retailer are less, right? Like in the US, chances are you're going to have Nexus in a lot of these states. Even if you're a big retailer outside the US, you probably don't have Nexus in all the states, but here you are remitting tax to every state.
So there's two sides of that coin. One is if I'm a retailer and I hire a merchant of record service, I don't have to deal with all those complexities, right? Like it's all on them.
Yep. Yes.
And I'm basically selling my goods to them and they're turning around and selling it to my customer. In practice, that's kind of the concept of what's happening with that. And now it's on them to comply with all of these tax laws. But what you're saying is the downside is when it comes to they're meeting those thresholds in Australia and New Zealand and others where as a small business, you can take advantage of duty and tax-free treatment. Suddenly, those thresholds are now on the merchant of record.
Yep.
And they're aggregating a whole bunch of volume. So they're going to be hitting all these thresholds. And now Nexus in a number of states, it's going to increase the costs to my customers in some of those regions of the world, which is going to have an impact on conversion.
Yep.
So now the question, so if I go payment facilitator route though, I now have to take on some responsibility for those tax laws versus merchant of record. I can wash my hands clean, but I have increased cost to my customers and lower conversion. So am I understanding that right?
Yeah, you're understanding it right. So then the question is, how do you still simplify it for the merchant if you're not the merchant of record?
Right.
So I think that these merchant of record services came from the side of, we'll become merchant of record, peel away liability to find the right middle ground. Mm-hmm. In our case at Zonos, right, what we've done is we started on, no, you could be the merchant of record. We'll take on the fraud risk, right? You're still the merchant of record. You get the quick payouts. We'll land a cost guarantee, right? Whether it's merchant of record or not, if it's Shopify, whatever, we will do the remittance and do all of that. So we're kind of coming to the same spot from different areas and different angles. And, of course, if I'm selling a merchant of record service, and look, we do it for some customers, it's not all bad. You're going to talk up the scariness of taking on that responsibility yourself. It's like you do this domestically, but yes, all right, this is scary. And then we're more saying like, look, no, you can be merchant of record. Don't confuse your customers with a different name on the bank statement. They went to it's like, it's different when you're shopping on Amazon and it says Amazon in a bank statement. Like, I get it. But when you go to,
Bob's T-shirts,
bobst-shirts.com, and it says, payment company Z or whatever, right? Or Global E or some other name. I was talking with a merchant just the other day. We had a call with them and they went to Markets Pro. And they're like, I hate this, right? I hate the fact that all my customers are confused. They like the shipping rates, has some good shipping rates. That's a different, subject. And we're not really out there offering shipping rates or anything. We're there to help facilitate. We're like a PayFac for the, logistics industry in a way. We're a facilitator. But he said, I cannot stand that my customers are getting, they don't understand this transaction. It's just raising his customer service levels. So that's another one of the disadvantages is the fact that, the name says, it's saying the wrong name. People are confused. There's another one though that is often missed, which is when you sign up they take on the restrictions, right? We help manage restrictions too, but a merchant of record is taking on all that risk for making sure that they're complying with certain laws and into that country. Not just that though, they're taking on the payment, the payment risk of selling those items. So we work with a lot of companies that are in a variety of industries that probably would never even get approved for a merchant of record service because it would put their account at risk. Vaping might be one, right? Some type of, or vaping flavoring, right? Something like that. But what's the most not realized is they will scrub your catalog when you sign up, and they will restrict items that are not necessarily restricted for import at all. So you'll get item restrictions that should not apply at all to what you're selling into that country because they are being overly cautious, and they have to be. The last thing they want is for you to shut down the payments for every single company in their portfolio they're aggregating for. And that's also another huge disadvantage. So it on the outside, it looks like you're getting all these benefits, but when somebody else has to take on all the risk, every single risk, like including payment type risks with, I can, not great. And so,
I want to talk a little bit about some of that risk though too. There's the payment, there's the merchant of record, there's exporter of record. So there's some compliance on shipping the goods out. But when it's actually landing in the country of destination, there's an importer of record. And from what I've seen, that's usually always the buyer, the shopper, right?
Yep.
And they're the ones responsible for compliance, bringing it into their country.
Yes.
It's not the merchant or the merchant of record. It's the importer that's bringing the goods into that country.
Yes. So let's say you're selling, knives or something, and you can export those fine out of the U.S., but you weren't paying attention to a knife that was shipped to a certain country. That's on the import of record. That doesn't change if you use a merchant of record service. It does for payments though. So, right? They might not be able to sell knives due to payment reasons. But and that's actually really important. Merchant of record, exporter of record, the company of in the export area, the importer of record, which is the person in that country. And most 90% of the time, that is not going to be the merchant of record service that is the importer of record.
Right. Whether you're using a payment facilitator or merchant of record, it's typically always the same.
There's some stuff with Canada, non-resident importer. We need to talk about that one day. But yes, for the most part, the importer of record is still the importer there. So you're not taking on that risk. The risk then was with your payments. And so if you're already approved for payments on your website to sell what you're selling, and then you have another payment provider come in and say, but because we're aggregating, we have to be a little more, careful in here than what you are, because they may have different rules or whatever. So you just got to be careful if you're going to switch to a service like that. Just eyes wide open.
So if I look at a payment facilitator, especially nowadays, technology has come so far. It gives you the levers for you to facilitate a transaction internationally and create the experience you want. And everything's based on your business, whether, tax compliance, all of that is based on your business. And when we're talking tax compliance, I think it's probably worth clarifying. We're talking anything where the burden has been shifted to the seller, which is something that's new just in the last 6 years, which with Nexus in the US and Australia and others coming out with these low value tax laws, those are the type of compliance responsibilities that are being shifted to whoever the merchant of record is. So me as a seller, I can use a payment facilitator. It gives me all the levers to run everything. And now I do have to manage those tax compliance things and take on some of the extra payment risk and things. But the payment facilitator helps me do all of that, correct?
Yeah.
If I go merchant of record, I take those levers and I give them to a third party, right? And then they take on all that responsibility for tax compliance. Am I getting it?
Yeah, spot on.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So maybe what I want to talk about now is I want to talk about Shopify Markets Pro. We've touched on it multiple times, but I actually kind of want to button this up on what is it versus markets. And then and the reason we want to take Shopify in its own realm is it is the biggest cross-border e-commerce platform out there that's and that has a service kind of in this space. And then we'll talk off Shopify Markets Pro, like other, whether it's BigCommerce, Magento, whatever. Okay, does that sound good?
Sounds good.
So let's start with Markets Pro versus Shopify Markets. Okay, and this is where, as we talk about this, and you think about the merchant of record service, it was the pitch that they say that the things you get are now built into like this payment facilitator model. So Markets Pro is through a payment facilitator, right? It's Shopify is partnered with, I believe it's Stripe. And what they're able to do is you're still the merchant of record on Shopify Markets, but it will present in the local currency. You may or may not have certain payment methods. It kind of depends, but it will be in the local currency. And you'll still get paid out in USD. You do have some FX risk there. And they charge additional, I think it's 1% or 1.5% to use markets. And now when you go to Markets Pro, the FX goes up from 1% or 1.5% to 2.5%. And the other thing that happens when you go to Markets Pro is now 6.5% in addition to the 2.5%. That is just a fee, right, to do the service. So that you're into this now, or your shopper, because that 2.5%,
it would make sense because they're taking on more risk.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah, they're taking on more risk. Like there has to be a charge for the risk, right? And so now you're at 9% for the transaction to the shopper. So if you cancel that order, you get hit now with the 9%. Like you don't get it back.
You don't get it back?
No.
Ouch.
Yeah. So it can be expensive.
Ouch.
Or it can hurt. Like imagine a really a big order that you had to do a change on or something else. Like ouch. Yeah, that can be really impactful if you're not paying attention.
And I don't get my cash very fast to begin with.
And you're not getting the cash very fast.
Wait, do I get it back fast?
No, I don't think so.
All right.
Yeah. So oh man. Yeah. I don't believe so. Well, I don't know the exact time frame, but I'm sure it's coming with their payout schedule. So yes, it could. It's going to fall on that weekly schedule somewhere in there.
It all works out okay,
Yeah.
but except for I'm getting everything back. Actually, no, this would be on a refund, so it's actually going the other direction.
Yeah.
But I'm losing out on the 9%.
Yeah. And then with Markets Pro, Markets, they don't offer any kind of shipping rates. You can pay extra to get duty and tax calculations, what are not guaranteed, and we're not going to go down that right now. So you can pay extra for some of those services, and then Markets Pro is more expensive, but you're going to get like really good DHL Express shipping rates and DHL Ecommerce, and then that is all you can use, right? That there is no other option. So, I
thought the merchant of record stuff didn't have to be tied in with fulfillment.
It doesn't, but they tie it in, right?
Okay.
This is back to the border free. Like, how do we just combine everything, put it in a black box?
Which I get this.
So this is why people get confused. Like a merchant of record service, they think of exporter of record, they think of the fulfillment. It's like, at least in cross border, they conflate it. They conflate the two.
Which there's some advantages to simplifying the whole process, right?
Yeah.
I can see that.
So, that's some of the, as you look at what you can achieve. First off, you're just going to get your normal Shopify charges if you use the Shopify markets and not the full 6.5%. So the question is, how on Shopify do I get the experience that I want, right, without completely handing everything over to a third party for merchant of record? And that's where I think markets is a really good option. It costs less. The FX is less. They don't have the 6.5%. You get, you're not going to get, you'll get refunded, right, if you cancel an order on your merchant fees, I believe, anyway. So, and here's the other thing is, because markets has to authorize it, I believe that you were getting hit no matter what. Whereas like when I settle capture, that was what I was looking for, because they have to capture the payment. But on Shopify markets, you can authorize it, cancel it, and then not get hit with the merchant fees. But if you capture it, then you're getting hit. So you don't have to get hit if you use Markets Pro.
Okay, Markets Pro.
Sorry,
you're going to get hit
because they capture the payment no matter what.
Okay, and on Markets they
might authorize for a bit, and you can cancel it if there's a problem, right? You want to change it. Depends on how you're running your e-com platform. So, you install Zonos' extension on Shopify. On Shopify, you can save that money that you're going to spend and if you run your normal process, be merchant of record, and then also now you get the benefits of, I don't have to remit tax into Australia possibly, or if I'm outside the US, I don't have to remit it to all these different states. But then Zonos can come in and sweep in and help with the actual facilitation of payment of duty and tax to all these different regions. So you still get the simplicity of having it all taken on by a third party without needing to bring in all those costs that third party is going to charge for you to do it. You can use your own carrier. You can use FedEx, UPS, use DHL. That's great. Or a consolidator, right? There's specific services that, and we should have a conversation one day about carriers, but there's some really good shipping carriers out there that you can utilize, and some of which will give you really good rates out of the box, right? Like we have some that we're not the ones, offering it, but that will just give really good shipping rates. So there's the Shopify bucket. And I don't think I missed much on Markets versus Markets Pro. But when you think markets, you're the merchant of record. You're still taking on a lot of responsibility, but you get local payments. With Markets Pro, you still get local payments and everything, but now the merchant of record's shifting. And with that shift is coming, you have to use a shipping service with Markets Pro and all of this, but it's more of just a out of the box, easy decision if you want to use that. It's, for any small business, they can just jump into that program. And so if you're really, really small, Markets Pro might be a good way to kind of get warmed up maybe. But I think as you get bigger, you're usually looking for a little more flexibility. It just depends on, and when I say bigger, it depends on how important cross-border is to you as an organization. Now let's get off platform, because Shopify controls the checkout, right? And so that they have a partnership with Global-e, which allows Global-e to be the merchant record in this case. When you're off Shopify, now you're into the situation where, well, who else does a merchant of record service? And the reason we're not talking about on Shopify is there are not others. They don't really allow it. So Reach is a really good company with payments that does a merchant of record service, and you're going to save on FX and all of that. A little more effort to build it into. When I say more effort, like you're now piecing things together. You're going to integrate Zonos right into your checkout. So let's say this is Magento. You integrate Zonos, then you integrate as well Reach. So you're kind of integrating both into one thing, and you can get some of these, the best of both worlds by kind of building your own thing. It's a little more effort probably than just integrating still even just a Global-e's, solution on one of those platforms. Now then you have Zonos Checkout, and this is where, and I think that we have some big advantages with Zonos Checkout, because we're now, this is where I love Stripe and Stripe Connect. We are now offering the payment facilitator option, similar to Markets, just Shopify Markets. But even beyond what Shopify Markets has, you have buy now, pay later options. You have all these different alternate payment methods, and you get to be the merchant of record. Zonos is the one that's screening for the fraud, taking on the risk for the fraud. Like Zonos Checkout is the sweet spot where you get all the things without giving up, so much control. You still get to use your own shipping carrier. Everything else, we're going to calculate the shipping
and duty and tax management as well.
Yeah, duty and tax management. It's all included, and it's still hosted on your site, but we're still controlling the modal that pops up. It's translated, right? It is an incredible experience, shopping experience with Zonos Checkout. And we relaunched this just, about 3-4 months ago. And it's a beautiful experience. The auto completion of the fields. We should actually have an episode that talks about shoppers' experiences and have a piece that talks about Zonos Checkout. Because again, I think the purpose of this podcast is to educate about the industry, and sometimes we're part of that industry. So I think educating what our products are doing. But so yeah, when you're off Shopify, you do have a lot of options, and you can get all the same, like get rid of your fraud risk and everything else without being the merchant of record. Like there are ways to do this without outsourcing the merchant of record, where you get to remain the merchant of record.
And if we go back in time, that hasn't always been the case, right? Was merchant of record really the only way to do it back in the day?
Here's why I think is at scale, being able to add accounts at scale to be their own merchant of record and take care of the settlement of the payment into the currency of the shopper, or basically, of the seller, and then present in the local currency. Like doing that at scale was extremely difficult. And this is where our partnership with Stripe has become amazing, because Stripe has built out the ability for us to do this at scale and in a way that is, extremely compliant and, on the up and up. Like it's awesome with Stripe Connect, where you can, your money too. Like the other thing that's cool about Stripe Connect is they'll hold that money in escrow, but it's actually technically it's in a bank account of your own. Like Zonos doesn't even touch, we can't take the money from that transaction. We're not floating the cash, right? Like I remember seeing looking at some of the financials for Global-e when it went public. And it's like, we had all this cash in the bank. And I'm like, that's not your cash. Like there was, seriously, like it was like, I don't remember the numbers, and I want to be careful because I didn't prep for this, but there was a lot of cash in their bank that was meant to be paid out to merchants. And they're actually, when you took that out, there wasn't a lot, which is so when they went public, they were able to bring in some more, raise some money. But with Zonos Checkout, using Stripe Connect, all these funds are in escrow inside of for lack of a better term, inside of Stripe, because in the background, you actually have an account that is just set for you. And that's why your payout, here's the other thing.
Which makes it my money.
And you get it next day.
That's awesome.
Right? So you're not waiting over a week to get a payout with Zonos checkout. You're getting it like the day after it settles. So it's not that this, I didn't think today we want to talk about like why merchant of record services are bad, because they aren't all bad, but it does change things when you use one. And, I think there's some merchants of ours, like where we are the merchant of record, where it made sense. It just, for whatever reason, it made sense for us to be that. But if I'm going to be honest, I think the vast majority of the time, you don't need to be. And people they're using the merchant of record service to get around things that can be solved with technology and with services. It's like, okay, let's just do the easy button. We'll just be merchant of record.
Right. But nowadays, technology's evolved to the point where you can still have a very simple, seamless experience for the merchant to be their own merchant of record and still facilitate the localized transaction for the shopper and everybody else. And it's simple, it works, and has some key advantages to it that maybe a merchant of record doesn't have.
I think that's what we call the best of all worlds, right? Yeah. The best of both worlds.
That brings me back to Hannah Montana, right? if anybody out here has ever watched that one, that's it's all about trying to have the best of both worlds. But to your point,
you must have girls, right?
Yeah.
So, you have a few kids.
I've got a few. I've got a few. I've got 8 kids at home. So,
you've seen some Hannah Montana for sure.
Yep. No, absolutely. But I think that's the interesting evolution of technology in general. You could probably come up with a number of examples where it started out one way to approach a problem. And it might be something where you have to offload a lot to a third party because the technology is just not there to support it. But over time, you're able to start creating a lot of your own solutions with the right technology providers. And so it sounds to me like merchant record has its place. But nowadays, it has less of a place than it used to.
For sure. Absolutely.
And if through payment facilitators with the right technology there, third-party, tax management companies like Zonos, we can help with that. In fact, we can help give you all the levers to run both payment facilitation and tax and fraud and all of that.
Yep.
But I get to stay as the merchant of record, and it doesn't put on the extra burden of charging tax and increasing costs to my shoppers in certain regions of the world.
Yep.
That sounds awesome.
Yep.
And I honestly, we haven't touched on this enough. I have control over my logistics and my fulfillment, which can be a good and bad thing, right?
Yes.
But if I have the ability to if I want to grow my business and have control over how those shipments get delivered and the rates at which they get delivered, let's be honest, these merchant of record services that are bundling everything together, they're just reselling shipping rates.
Right. They're not the shipping carrier. No,
right. They're playing the middleman.
Yeah. Globally is using DHL and DHL Express.
Right.
And so, it's being resold. And it doesn't mean you can't get a good rate. Like you can get some really good rates here, but there does come a threshold where you're like, well, maybe I want to ship USPS to Canada.
Right.
Right. Like there's some really good advantages to shipping USPS to Canada. We've talked about it with being able to do DDP with USPS, but you can't. So you just lose, you lose flexibility. And when it's time that you need to change something, you can't because you are not in control.
Right. And there's ways, and this could be a whole nother episode too, there's ways for even the small retailers to get good shipping costs without leveraging someone like that. There's resellers in the space that specialize in aggregating volume to offer low cost to small shippers.
Right.
And you don't have to sell the whole farm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And same, when you sign up with us, there's some carriers that will just out of the box give certain rates directly to you. And we're not even, jumping in the middle there at all, just because obviously we're helping, facilitate more international orders for these shipping carriers. And so, and heck, they all should. Every single one that signs up for Zonos really should just have something default, because this is one area where I think we can get better at Zonos is helping merchants arrive at that best rate that they can get without us trying to cut into the cream and make a ton of money on the shipping and all of that. Like that's not been our, it's not been our deal.
Right. I view it as we're the facilitator for the cross-border transaction. We can help piece together the payment facilitator, the duty and tax management, manage all the tax remittance, and also the fulfillment. Because I think for many e-commerce merchants, the fulfillment's a pretty intimidating part. Like, how do I even ship this stuff?
Yeah.
How do I even process the paperwork? And we can take care of all of that.
Right. Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, I think we nailed on most of the points today about merchant of record.
Anything else you think we need to touch on?
No. I think let's save our knowledge for the next Decoding e-commerce, cross-border e-commerce podcast. It's the name. Like I can't. It's right up here on the screen. Decoding cross-border e-commerce, and I seem to jumble that somehow. I don't know why. I think I came up with it, and I can't. Can't seem to. It's not rolling off the tongue yet.
Well, and I think that's the. That's our mantra. That's what we try to do here is you leverage technology to decode cross-border.
Yeah.
And as we've discussed today, we touched on one small part of it.
Oh yeah.
And it's complex.
This is going to be super helpful though. This episode to both people at Zonos for our customers in the supply chain space, and then our e-commerce companies that are trying to understand like what am I picking. Hopefully, again, if we missed, there is a chance we got some things wrong in this. But let us know. We're happy to correct ourselves. But for the most part, I think we generally got most of it right.
Yep, it's been awesome.
All right, thanks for hosting, Aaron. This was great.
Thanks, Clint.
All right, we'll see you.